Okay, so the thing about Tamlin, especially the thing about Tamlin in the mainstream fandom that I have a hard time understanding is that how are you going to call Tamlin a narcissist for the shit that Reese does and is celebrated for? You guys are mad at Tam Tam for locking up Feyre when Rhysand essentially put Feyre in a bubble while she was pregnant so that people wouldn't smell her pregnancy smell. Like, come on. Like, it's the difference between house arrest and having an ankle bracelet. As an example, not Feyre, Fiona Gallagher from Shameless. She was arrested for a while for some plot related reasons, and she was on house arrest and then eventually got an ankle bracelet on. It didn't matter that she could leave the house on the ankle bracelet. She was still being watched by her probation officer, by, the state of Illinois, shit like that. It's literally the difference between house arrest and having an ankle bracelet on. And it's actually even worse because while Feyre did have her ankle bracelet on, which is like her little bubble, like her little pregnancy shield bubble, Rhysand's also Daemati, so he has access to Feyre's thoughts and shit. Like, Feyre is imprisoned and Feyre is under surveillance with Rhysand in a way that Tamlin's abilities can't even wrap their little ability feelers on. And I feel like it's easy to forget that because of the way that the ACOTAR as a whole, the narrative is framed. Tamlin and Rhysand are out here doing very similar things, but because the narrative demonizes Tamlin and rewards Rhysand, we're out here calling him a feminine sanitary product, like feminine sanitary products are inherently shameful. This is a tampon, y'all. Tampons are useful. This is a Tamlin. Tamlins are useful for exposing the hypocrisy of the narrative framing of ACOTAR. Now, were the things that he did to Feyre okay? Absolutely not. Like, I disliked Tamlin for a very, very, very long time. I wasn't, like, as feral about it as the rest of y'all, but I didn't vibe with him either. Like, I get it. But the thing is, are you disliking the actual behavior, or are you being taken in by ACOTAR's narrative structure? Because you can't get mad at Tamlin for being possessive over Feyre and sidelining her and all of that shit, and then let this motherfucker slide on by for withholding shit like Feyre's basic medical information and, him yelling at Feyre's sister for doing the right thing because Nesta was framed correctly. She was framed as correct in House of Flame and Shadow. There are not many pro-Rhysand girlies that have the smoke for him when he does Tamlin-flavored shit. And that's because Feyre doesn't have the smoke for him either, because Feyre is kind of a victim to this narrative framing. I think we also just need to sit down collectively as a fandom and admit to ourselves and to each other that Tamlin essentially became an effigy for every man who has ever harmed us. We see in Tamlin the shit that our exes did to us, and that doesn't make for a good environment to look at this character critically. It makes for a good environment to kind of work out some of your own personal demons, but you can't look at Tamlin objectively and with a critical eye and see your ex in him. Like, it's not possible. This is why I try to be as even-handed as I can about Cassian. I don't always succeed, but I try to be very even-handed about him because he reminds me of some of my worst exes. So I know that a lot of the things that I say about Cassian are going to come from a very personal place. So that doesn't make for the most objective environment to break down Cassian as a character. We have to be willing to give Tamlin the same amount of leeway. And when we do, we will realize that Tamlin and Rhysand are foils. They are what the other would become if some other mitigating factor didn't happen to them. They're foils. They're the same. Feyre has a type. And I think that's painful for some mainstream ACOTAR girlies, because if Tamlin reminds us of our exes, and then Rhysand is the same as Tamlin, did we really learn anything? And on a more book and series related level, did Feyre really trade up? Like, yeah, like we shit on Tamlin for being like the blonde Republican dude who taxes his people and all of that. But then she mates somebody who runs a fantasy apartheid state. Like, did Feyre really trade up? It's also very weird to me when I see pro Rhysand girlies being like, oh, I don't like Tamlin because of the way that he treats Lucian. Rhysand doesn't treat Lucian very well either. And if we really want to talk about how Tamlin and Rhysand treat their friends, I need to direct you to a Tumblr post I saw not that long ago. So Rhysand in the Court of Frost and Starlight does his whole like, I think that you should kill yourself for all the shit you did to Feyre, blah 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 blah. Like shitty, but okay, fine. But then Rhysand goes to Feyre about it, and Feyre's like, oh well, I would have said worse. But then there's like a line, like a throwaway line that I just remembered because this Tumblr user said something about it. It was like hearing how Rhysand talks to Cassian. It's pretty tame what he said to Tamlin. So now I'm just like, yeah, how the fuck does Rhysand talk to Cassian? At least when Tamlin is being horrible to Lucian, it's coming from like a place of trauma. Like you know where it's coming from. Like Tamlin isn't really a dick to Lucian until Tamlin is no longer in control of his own like mental faculties and things like that. Which I think is why Lucian seems more forgiving of him than Rhysand in the Night Court and things like that. Like when Lucian was out here defending Tamlin, Tamlin's shitty behavior was new. It was not an established pattern for him. Like, you got to keep in mind that before Tamlin comes across Feyre and before Feyre meets Rhysand and all of that, Tamlin inspired such loyalty in his sentries that they all crossed the border into the human lands to die for him so that they could attract, like, a human girl, like, to kill them or whatever. So he was sending a lot of his sentries out there to die. Established that he didn't want to do this, his sentries volunteered because they needed the curse broken and they loved him that much. And what Lucian knows and what Feyre is not aware of is that unlike Tamlin, Rhysand has a long history of having a shitty reputation of being like, you know, the asshole in the room. So that would affect the way that Lucian interacts with him, the way that Tamlin interacts with him, the other High Lords and all of that. And it's weird because the narrative kind of warps around the Night Court once we as the audience are meant to see them as the good guys. Because at the end of the day, there are certain things that the Night Court does out in the world, like especially in Akawar, that are essentially declarations of war to the other courts, but then it never pans out because the Night Court is the good guys. It has to work out for them. I just feel like a lot of the hatred for Tamlin is really brewed up by the fandom and by our own biases against our exes and turning him into an effigy for our exes. And we end up not seeing him with the most critical objective eye, and we end up thinking the absolute worst of him. This is why I don't fuck with Tamlin as a ship either, because I feel like the Tamlin ship is kind of an embracing of the worst aspects of what the fandom thinks of both of these characters. And as Elaine's lawyer, I just will not stand for it. I also have a Tamlin OTP that I will never shut up about, that the only fic on AO3 for them is mine. Actually, I lied to you. I checked AO3 and there is a second fic in there, but I can't like screenshot it because the tags are wild. I feel like the TikTok would take my video down if I showed it to you. But there is a second fanfic in the Jamlin ship now, so yay. Either way, I do think that we need to take a really hard look at ourselves as a fandom and as readers and ask ourselves, do we hate this man because he is the absolute worst person in the ACOTAR universe? Or do we hate him because the narrative wants us to hate him? And then why does the narrative want us to hate him more than people who are doing the same shit as him, maybe even worse than him? All of this to say, I do not think Tamlin is a narcissist. I think Tamlin is a deeply broken person in a world full of deeply broken people who gets a lot more shit from the fandom than he probably deserves.